They awoke from the freeze. They found that the world was not right. Firstly, a couple of female staff brought in food, but the food is very high-tech and not at all like the food of their time. Secondly, when Max is sneaking a cigarette, a couple of security guards come out of the woodwork and spray them with a fire extinguisher. It turns out that, in this world, cigarettes are forbidden. The two men wonder what's going on in this world and ask the guardian, Lamia, about it. But what Lamia said shocked them even more. It turns out that shortly after they went into hibernation, World War II broke out. Since then, no one has bothered them. They have been asleep for 53 years and have just woken up today. What shocked them even more was that now all the men in the world are extinct. They are the only men left. The world is now full of women. They reproduce through monogamy. Albert had no idea that the world would change so drastically. His family is gone, and they are in deep sorrow. Max didn't care what happened to the world. He just really liked Lamia. So one day he kissed Lamia by force, although Lamia knocked him down in a fit of rage. But the kiss awakened her instincts. She then secretly fell in love with Max. A few days later, Albert and Max were received by the Queen, and through the Queen's mouth they learned the reason for the extinction of man. It turns out that during the Third World War, a biological bomb was developed to paralyze man, but the bomb had gone wrong and accidentally wiped out all men. Max said that as the last man on Earth, he was willing to take on the responsibility of reproduction, to fill the world with men again, but the Queen rejects him with hostility because in this world, women are brought up to believe that men are all demons. The unpleasant chat was over. Albert and the two of them were thrown back into the room. Meanwhile, Lamia's heart was struggling. On the one hand, she wanted to abide by the law and stay away from men, but on the other hand, she often missed Max. Even the drugs she took to suppress her nature didn't help. On this day, she secretly bribes an old grandmother with a bottle of forbidden jam. She asked what kind of creature men really were. The grandmother said that in their olden days, men were an important part of a woman's life. Nature would not be normal without men. These words secretly inspired Lamia's sense of rebellion. A few days later, the Queen sent a protocol for Albert to declare that it was a mistake to be born male. They were also asked to agree to a sex change. Albert, of course, could not accept it, so the two men were eventually brought to trial. The whole assembly was filled with women complaining about how bad men were. Albert was furious when he heard this. He retorted, great men like Copernicus and Einstein were not men. The women, however, accused him of lying. They had been taught from an early age that Copernicus and Einstein were women. Only bad men like Cain were men. In the end, Albert and Max are found guilty and put back in their rooms. But Max is not content to wait for his punishment. He kissed a female guard again and managed to knock her out. After discovering the power of this skill, he kissed one female soldier after another and escaped from the room. The two escaped through a secret passage to a secret meeting place. Many women were partying secretly to the music, but this kind of entertainment was illegal. At this moment, a pair of guards chased Albert here. There was a melee. Albert and the others escaped in the confusion. They ran into Lamia as soon as they came out. Lamia did not report them. Instead, he took them to a giant forward-looking glass. They looked through it and realized the base was in fact a refuge hundreds of meters underground. The surface world was uninhabitable due to the nuclear radiation from the World War. The reason Lamia showed them this was to convince them to stay. Yet Albert still feels that even dying of radiation in the natural world was better than staying in this monstrous underground world. Seeing that he had failed to convince them, Lamia raised the alarm and had the guards come and arrest them, for which he received a medal. But Lamia soon regretted it, for what awaits Albert and Max is a sex change operation. And sure enough, Albert and Max were immediately wheeled into the operating theater. As Max lay on the operating bed, he was surprised to find that the attending surgeon could call him by his first name. It turns out that Max had a wife and daughter when he underwent the freezing experiment. The attending surgeon is now his daughter. Max tried to impress his daughter with warm words like, "I'm your father." However, the daughter held a grudge against the father, who had abandoned her for 53 years. She said she would get back at him. Luckily, just then, Lamia sneaks into the operating room. After all, She couldn't bear the thought of Max undergoing a sex change operation, so she cut the electricity and let Albert escape in the dark. Next, the trio grabbed 3 suits from the guards and rode the lift to the surface. When they got to the surface, they found that there was really only a wasteland outside, but for some reason, they didn't make it more than a few steps before they hit the wall. When Max realized that something was wrong, he took a knife and cut. It turns out that the so-called doomsday scene is actually just an iron curtain. It was only through this iron curtain that the 3 of them came to the real nature. Not only was there an ocean and a forest, but most importantly, there was a bird of prey. This bird was a good indication that the radiation from the nuclear war had dissipated. They were delighted to get out of their protective suits and arrive at a house in the woods. Not only did all the appliances work, but there was even fresh food in the fridge. The 3 of them didn't have time to think about why there was fresh food, so they ate it. But just then a female officer from the underground base came after them. But the oxygen in her protective suit was limited, so she passed out as soon as she showed up. Albert woke the female officers up, but she was too loyal, and as soon as she opened her eyes, she fought with Albert again. During the fight, they accidentally touched the remote control, which brought the news from the underground base on the TV. It was only after watching the news that they realized the officials of the underground base had chosen 2 women to pose as Albert and Max. They were extolling the success of their sex change operation and how they had been reborn. But this was a 100% fake. The female officers had no idea that the underground base was so full of lies. She joined Albert's team from then on. The 2 men and 2 women then solemnly explored the harmony of nature as representatives of both men and women. Just as they finished their exploration, the queen suddenly entered the cottage. The group rushed to subdue the queen and were even more shocked to discover that she was a man. It turns out that although most of the men were eliminated in the World War, there were still a few men left. After the war, the government forced all these men to change their sex. The queen was a young boy at the time. His mother taught him to dress up as a woman to protect him. He was able to blend into the female world and eventually became queen. In fact, he knew that the surface world was already habitable, but he didn't want to tell the others out of selfishness. He just came to the villa alone for fun. That's why Albert found so many new things when he came to the villa. After listening to them, Albert offered a very generous deal that they would not expose the queen. In exchange, the queen would give them the villa, and the queen happily agreed. But even so, Albert still felt it wasn't complete. So at the end of the film, they returned to the underground base. In the laboratory of the monogamous breeding, they make some changes. After the women were injected with the liquid, they became pregnant and gave birth to male children, and the world goes back to normal.